Welcome back to Konstantinovsk and the year 1980. Seems like you've picked a hell of a day for it, so I hope you remembered to pack an umbrella. Since you were last here, we've made a few modifications to the central square. As you can see, that big sort of square-looking building is no longer there. As you can see in these photos, just in the left-hand corner, there's no evidence of anything being there at the time, so I thought, get rid and pop a little park in there instead. And I'd probably be remiss if I didn't start this video with an apology. I did say last time that I'd get a video out in the middle of January, and looks like I'm about a month late on that. So I hope this bumper edition 50-minute long episode goes some way towards making up for that. And if not, then there's going to be a short 5-minute-ish sort of bonus episode that's going to come out quite hot on the heels of this one. So hopefully that will sate the appetite for more Konstantinovsk, if such appetite exists out there. Alternatively, you might be of the mind that less is more. And if that's the case for you, and this seems like a bit of a long episode for your liking, then I can tell you that about halfway through I've popped in a little intermission card, so you can break it up into 2 episodes if that's how you prefer to watch it. Whichever way you slice it, this is going to be a jam-packed episode, and it could have gone on for a lot longer. Honestly, it could have stretched to about an hour and a half if I'd included everything that I've built since last time. Obviously, that would have been a little bit too decadent if it had gone on for that long, but you'll see everything that we built today in the cinematics at the end. Speaking of the end, let's get this episode started. Okay, so the plan was to build a smallish area surrounding Victory Square. Now, Victory Square sits at the northern end of Lenin Avenue, which we did last time, and it's surrounded by this, the Communist Party headquarters, this Lenin Statue, which has a sort of plinth to stand on for party officials during parades, and this train station, both the old German facade building that was rehabilitated after the Second World War, and this ticket office that's more in the concrete Soviet style. That was the area that I was going to focus on, and it was going to take up a space around about the size of what I'm drawing on the map here. Well, that was the plan anyway. Then I went back to that old film of Kaliningrad from 1980, and the plan changed quite drastically. See, this fountain park is just up the road from Victory Square, and I've been itching to do this ever since I started doing this project. And of course that would mean building all of the surroundings of that park, which includes this drama theatre and the gardens of the university here, and of course the university itself, which you can see in this clip. All of these are on Prospect Mira, which is the main road leading west from Victory Square.
Весь город с полным основанием можно назвать ботаническим садом. Аллеи каштанов и рябин, краснолистных буков и махровых боярышников. Здесь можно встретить южан.
All this is to say, I didn't know when to stop, and an area of this size became an area of this size, which I hope goes some way to explaining why this episode took so long. Anyway, let's make a start. I wanted to capture the facade of Kaliningrad Severny Station quite faithfully for Konstantinovsk, and to get the pillars right at the front, I ended up having to use highway pillars, and I've tried a few different types here. Started off using this one, but then obviously the pillars in real life aren't cylindrical, they're more oblong shaped, so I switched to this type of highway pillar that you see me putting down here. And I also wanted to make sure I had the same number of pillars as exist in real life. obviously trying to stick quite faithful to it. Although there will be some differences between Konstantinovsk Severny Station and the Kaliningrad one, as you'll see shortly. And once again, I'm using procedural objects here to sort of manipulate the pillars into the shapes and sizes that I want them in. It's quite amazing, honestly, what becomes possible with procedural objects. And I know this is quite a simple thing, but even so, before procedural objects, this wouldn't have really been possible. So really can't imagine playing the game without it now. Now, I've placed some buildings down behind the pillars here. I've used these 50s era Soviet buildings by Donald, and they're a little bit more fancy than what was actually there in Kaliningrad. And again, this is Konstantinovsk. These are the differences between the two cities. And as they are rehabilitated old German buildings anyway, I thought it'd be appropriate for them to be given a little bit more, I don't know, ornamentation, especially given the era that they'd have been rehabilitated in, which would have been the 1950s. Now, for the station itself, I've used these Terminus Station templates by DL on the workshop. Of course, that means I'll have to add in the platforms and everything myself at a later point. But the layout of the Kaliningrad Severny Station itself is somewhat unusual in that it has these 3 or 4 terminus platforms at ground level for trains coming from the north. And then there is this other platform at a lower level that serves trains coming from both north and south. And the tunnel goes underneath Victory Square. So we're going to have a lot of fun with different terrain heights shortly. In fact, you can see right now I'm laying down the station at the lower level that serves both north and south. And then to cover up the vanilla tunnel entrance, I'm using this embankment tunnel piece. I soon switched this out for one of Revo's network retaining wall tunnels. And that's for 2 reasons. One, because the texture is just quite a lot better. And the other reason being I can then use the rail yard retaining walls and then the textures would all match. Here's my technique for covering up tunnels. So you get a square of asphalt like this, and then you turn it into a procedural object, rotate it on its side, colour it in a dark black, and then you have something that Wile E. Coyote would fall for. So to create the platforms, I'm using these platform networks by Seb Nichols on the workshop, and then filling out the space in the middle with some ploppable pavements. And I'll use some decals to better match the texture of the pavement to the platform networks at a certain point shortly. But while we're on the subject of trains, I wanted to talk a bit more about the unusual layout of Konstantinovsk Severny Station, and I want to talk specifically about railway gauges. You see, German East Prussia used standard gauge rails. That's 1,435 millimeters distance between the 2 rails. Russian railways are gauged at 1,520 millimeters. So to reflect the changing nature of Konstantinovsk's railways and the conversion to Russian gauge, only East German trains arrive at the lower platform that goes south, and only Russian trains arrive at the terminus platforms from the north. I think our first train is about to arrive. Let's see what it's going to be. This is a German Class 52 steam locomotive. Actually, it's probably a Class 52.80 Rekolok. That means a reconstruction locomotive. In the DDR, East Germany, there was a large program to reconstruct lots of old locomotives, and it's likely that this would have been one of those. Trouble is, it seems to have dropped off its passengers into thin air, so looks like I'm going to have to build another platform on that side. Anyway, it's time to build the ticket office first of all, and this is just going to be another procedural objects mashup of various different concrete blocks that I found on the workshop and just reshaping them and stretching them until they start looking like a ticket office. So as you can see on the lower level, I've made that extra platform on the other side of the tracks, and now I'm just adding a sort of pedestrian walkway over from one side to the other using these pedestrian deck props by Ryuichi Kaminogi. But of course the pedestrians won't use them, they'll just disappear into thin air and reappear wherever they want. And I know I could use invisible pathways to fix that, and one day I might, but it's a little bit fiddly, and I think I've spent enough time here as it is. So while it's still pretty bare bones, the station is up and running for all intents and purposes, and you can see what I was on about earlier. We have Russian Elektrishka trains arriving at this terminus station, whereas German trains go under the tunnel heading from south to north. And here you might notice that the footage isn't exactly in chronological order, as I'm remodeling the ticket office, which you saw in the previous shot as completed. But what I did was sink these little Polish kiosks into the concrete walls to look like desks at the ticket office. We're getting to the last details of the train station now, and I thought it would be nice to have this sort of side entrance that leads onto the westernmost platform, seeing as you'd probably be able to buy your ticket when you get on the train from the conductor anyway. So I've scaled down these yellow arches to fit over the pathways and between the fences, and they lead quite nicely from this car park that I'm creating here using ploppable asphalt. So that's enough talking from me for this part, I think. I'll see you in the next section. This statue of Vladimir Lenin stands overlooking Victory Square, or at least it used to. It's now been moved to a location on the south side of the city, but this is 1980, so it's still here. And eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that I'd already placed it down around the same time as I put down the train station But the real fun for me was building this sort of a plinth for the Communist Party members to stand on during parades, and also this permanent seating installation. And I'm using the same concrete blocks that I used to build the train station ticket office to make this. To me, it was a lot more fun than just, popping down a Lenin statue and having done with it. And I happened across this absolute goldmine of old photos of Kaliningrad, and I'll pop a link to that website in the description of this video. It was a very useful resource for me and really instructive on getting the look and feel of the era right. And in the cinematics at the end of this video, you'll see that I've tried to recreate a few of the photos that I found on that site. But as for the practical side of building this installation, it's the usual fare of using procedural objects on staircases and concrete blocks. And as you can see here, I'm matching the staircase up to the tiers of the concrete seating area. And that seating area is also functional. There's these things on the workshop called seat site parks, I think. It's this little red dot that you place and citizens will sit down on them. And I've used a bunch of those on the seating area. The park behind the Lenin statue contains one surviving Königsberg building, a pavilion that was used as a restaurant during the Eastern Fair. This was a trade fair that was held twice yearly from 1920 till 1928, and then annually from 1928 till 1941. Now, to recreate this, I've used a Spanish bull ring, but of course having an open-top bull ring in the middle of a Soviet city would seem a little bit out of place, so I've used this water tower and turned it into a procedural object and sunk it down so it acts as a roof over the bull ring. These days it's a watch repair shop, but during the Soviet years it was a sports centre. Now, I want it to serve the same purpose in Konstantinovsk as it did in Kaliningrad, and I'm aware that the sign I'm putting up there now is not for a sports centre or anything like it. It's probably for a clothes shop, I think. But it was better to have some Cyrillic there than Plaza del Toros. So I hope you'll forgive me for that little oversight. That being said, I will probably come back to this and make my own sign for it. As you can probably tell from the intros that I've done so far, I never really leave anything alone once I've, so say, finished it. Everything is a work in progress as far as I'm concerned. So don't worry, this won't be the last we see of this building. Last little detail here, these 6 red banners behind Lenin. Now, because banners aren't animated like flags are in this game, I've stretched some of the vertices using procedural objects on each flag, just ever so slightly to make them look less like static objects and more real. So that's our monument to Lenin on Victory Square, and you'll see that I've put some markings down on the concrete in front of the statue. That will come into play later on, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The Russia Theatre, which we're basing our Konstantinovsk analogue on, used to sit behind the Communist Party headquarters, facing onto a square that was sort of squeezed between Lenin Avenue and Theatre Street. And that square itself was a continuation of the Mother Russia Park, or in our case, the Soldier on the Mountain Park, which you might remember from the last episode. And I say it used to sit there because, like a great many things in Kaliningrad, it ain't there anymore. But the Konstantinovsk version of this theatre is going to be quite a bit taller than the Russia theatre in Kaliningrad. And as you can see, I'm using this Lugo theatre by Armesto on the workshop, and then combining that with these 2 small Russian cinemas that I've turned into procedural objects and made taller so they match the height of the Lugo theatre. And the reason I'm doing that is because the Lugo Theatre has these sort of blank wall sides as if they're meant to be connected to other buildings either side of it. Of course, the building I'm building here is meant to be a standalone, so I wanted to have the sides not be blank, basically. Now, here I'm creating the sign for the theatre, and I don't have a Cyrillic lettering pack, just got the Latin letters, but you can sort of MacGyver them into looking like the Cyrillic letters if you sort of switch them around the wrong way and things like that, as long as you're not trying to do anything too complicated with them. I'm being very sparse with the detailing of this little park slash square here. As you'd have seen in the photo, it is pretty sparse like that. And something I think most of us Cities Skylines players need to get a little bit more comfortable with is the idea of empty space. It's something to be a little bit less afraid of, and I think after really trying to come to grips with that in this particular build, that's something I'll be remembering for the future. Alongside my own little Soviet billboards here, I'm placing down this little propaganda pillar that was made by Chris Brammer, and that name is going to come up once more in this video because without him this whole build wouldn't have really been possible. Just plonking down another fancy looking building next to the Russia Theatre here. This one is a railway office from Kharkiv in the Ukraine, although in Konstantinovsk I'm not sure. I think it might be a museum. Let me know what you think it should be in the comments. Whatever this building ends up being, I can be pretty sure that its occupants are going to need somewhere to dump their rubbish. Last addition to this area, on the other side of Theatre Street, is this Univermag, a department store. In the real-life Kaliningrad, it's a lot smaller and it's called Mayak, and looks a lot different to how it did back in the 80s nowadays. However, it is still there, so at least that's something. So that concludes the first half of our Konstantinovsk bonanza. In a few moments you'll see the intermission screen come up, and that'll be your cue to press pause and just do something else with your life for a little while. Then, whenever you're ready, you can come back to us for part 2. Kaliningrad City Hall was originally constructed as a trade hall for the Eastern Fair back in 1923, but since 1927 it served as the seat of government for the city in both the Kaliningrad and Königsberg eras, and it is in this form that we see it in Konstantinovsk. And here's where I have to give a huge thank you to Chris Brammer for creating this model. It looks just the way it did in the 70s and 80s, following on from the reconstruction that was required after it was damaged during the Second World War, and then when it got a new facade later on, and that's how we see it here today. But Chris worked so hard on this one, and the proof is in the pudding, I think. The results speak for themselves. Chris, you absolutely knocked it out of the park on this one. And Chris has put this building on the workshop now, and I'll pop a link to that in the description, so if you want this in your own Soviet city, you can have it. And I think it would work in any Soviet sort of setting. It doesn't look like it's a sort of reconstructed old German building. It does have that sort of, cuboid concrete sort of look to it, I suppose. So if you're worried about it looking out of place, I wouldn't be that worried. Of course, a well-made building needs equally well-made surroundings, so I'm constructing this little park that sits over the top of the railway tunnel that goes underneath Victory Square, and this is right next to what was then known as the Communist Party headquarters, but is now known as Kaliningrad City Hall. And in our timeline of Konstantinovsk, this would have been where the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Republic of Prussia would have held their Congress. And just to clarify, I don't mean they'd have held Congress in the park, I mean they'd have held it in the building there. Here I'm constructing a small garden that sits between the Russia Theatre and the City Hall / Communist Party headquarters. And I know this seems like there's a lot of parks in this particular area, but do remember, back in episode 1, as I said, this city is meant to be a garden city. And so it would be appropriate to have that many areas of greenery and natural beauty. But beyond just that being part of the brief of the city, it is as important to me that people have somewhere to eat their lunch when they're on a break from work, as it is for people to have somewhere to put their rubbish. And here I'm placing down that famous Swords into Plowshares sculpture, or at least a sort of shrunken down replica of it. The real life version sits in New York City, but it was actually a gift from the Soviet Union. It was sculpted by Soviet sculptor Yevgeny Vuchetich. But I didn't want it in blue, I wanted it a bit more bronze looking, so I've used procedural objects to place this coloured square over the texture. You can do that in the text field editor, and then coloured that square in a sort of pale yellowish colour, changed the opacity so some of the texture grains still came through, and there you have it. You might notice behind the Communist Party headquarters here I've placed down these Gaz-14 Chaika limousines. And I was able to do that using a mod that creates a prop version of all trees and vehicles in the game. And that's how I've been able to create some of the little scenes that I've got in the city here. Last things I'm putting down here are some kiosks and newsstands for people to pick up their copies of Pravda, and a couple of benches, and I think we're ready to move on to the next section. Just tucked around the corner from Victory Square is this old, unassuming building. It's the local headquarters for the KGB. Before Kaliningrad came to be, it was the police headquarters for Königsberg, and since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it now houses the offices of the local branch of the FSB. As you can see, there's no one building on the workshop that looks like this. So I've had to make it piecemeal out of a bunch of different Renaissance-era buildings and Dutch buildings and some other German apartment blocks. And eventually I arrived at something that looked kinda like it. For me, that's all part of the fun of this game. And this particular area of the city seems to house most of the surviving Königsberg-era buildings, so I was able to have fun building in a completely different style than the usual. And I was able to go kind of off-script from just copying directly from Kaliningrad, because these are areas that are, for obvious reasons, less photographed than others in the city, so you have to kind of make it up as you go along, which is a whole different challenge, and one I quite welcomed. I thought this yard outside the KGB offices might be a good place to finally pop down some military hardware, and these assets have all been made by Sarin on the workshop. And if you want to see more of them, you'll just have to wait till the bonus episode. If you're wondering where to get these little soldier props here, then you can check out Teamin B on the workshop. They have so many person props, both military, police, and people in general poses that you can use to create little scenes. And I don't know why, but this one is one of the details I'm most proud of in the game, that dust around the helicopter. All I've used is these stain decals to make it look as though the helicopter blades have blown some dust around. And I think it was quite an effective little technique. Here's another little detail coming up. I made a tiny little portrait of Yuri Andropov, who was the head of the KGB in 1980 before becoming the premier of the Soviet Union in 1982 following Leonid Brezhnev's death. I don't know, I get a kick out of putting in little Easter eggs in this city build, except I'm showing you where they are, and I already know where they are, so probably don't think too deeply about that. Friends, comrades, we're on the home stretch, and appropriately we've come full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning of this video, which is why it took so goddamn long, and that's because I decided I had to build this university campus and the drama theatre and the fountain park and everything that went with it, so let's get into it. So you'd have already seen me plop down the Soviet University by Donald, but here I'm using the Charlottenburg Palace as an extra wing of the university, probably an older part of the campus, and another post-war restoration project. Now we get to place down the drama theatre. And this building, the real-life building that this model is based off of, actually exists somewhere else in Kaliningrad. In fact, it exists in quite a few different cities across the former Soviet Union. It was a palace of culture design that was essentially copied and pasted throughout Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. And sooner or later, I'll have to copy and paste it myself. One of the things I saw quite a lot of while looking at old photos of Kaliningrad were these almost quite garish bright orange pathways. So to get that effect, I took these pinky red decals and then turned them into procedural objects, of course. and then tinted them slightly yellow to get that orange colour. That's how. Why is a mystery that I think will be lost to us for all time. Now, here in front of the main building of the university, I'm placing down a statue of Sergei Korolev. He was regarded by many as the father of practical astronautics and was the chief designer of the Soviet space program in its early years. He unfortunately passed away unexpectedly in 1966, but I like to think that in our timeline, before his death, he had a brief stint as a lecturer at Konstantinovsk Technical University. And given the university's focus on astronautics, I can imagine that being possible. Just across the way from the main university building, I'm placing down these Berlin office buildings, and they're going to act as the Konstantinovsk State Library, or the Library of the Soviet Republic of Prussia. And in real-life Kaliningrad, there is a state library just over the road from the university. And these Berlin Wedding District buildings from the Wedding District pack on the workshop were as near as damn it to the Kaliningrad State Library, and they make a good facsimile. As do these French apartments, actually, that I'm placing down here. They're 5-story. They look quite like the more unusual Khrushchevkas that you would find in, especially somewhere like Kaliningrad, where a lot of those buildings weren't pure new build. They were rehabilitated old German buildings once again. Now, this little commercial row of shops is one of those areas that I started to work on and then realized that I was getting a little bit carried away with myself and going way off the brief from what I set out to do. But I will revisit this area, probably not in the next episode or anytime too soon, but we will see it again. And the same goes for this area here. What I was trying to do mostly was get enough stuff in the background so that any shots of what I was working on would look a little bit more complete. Now, here's an example of me using the finger on the monitor technique to get these planters equidistant from each other. It's primitive, but it works. Although, if anyone has any monitor wipes they want to lend me, I'd appreciate it. Now we're getting to work on the fountain part that I've been itching to do for so long now. And first of all, I thought I might do it entirely custom, using just wall networks and these ploppable water surfaces. And I still use the water surfaces. You can see me placing this round one down now, but I actually stack 3 on top of each other. And that gives it a sense of depth and a bit more opacity to it. But then I found this classical looking fountain and thought I would turn it into a procedural object, as usual, and then essentially harvest it for parts. I mean, it doesn't need all of those tiers. It wants to be ornate, but it doesn't need all that. I mean, this isn't France. So I got rid of the excess and then put it into place underneath the water surfaces. And the real-life fountain I'm basing this off actually underwent quite a few changes over the years, but the way I've got it configured here looks quite a lot like how it looked in the mid-70s, so quite era appropriate for a 1980 series. And now what you see me doing is I've turned these waterfalls into procedural objects, and they still animate, which I was ever so thankful for, because they really bring this water feature in the fountain to life. And along with the little water jets I've got coming out of the middle here, I honestly couldn't have wished for a better result. To create the perimeter around the fountain, I'm using these rail yard retaining walls sunken down into the ground, and then putting these little seat site parks from earlier all around that low perimeter wall and around the edge of the fountain, so you'll be able to see Sims sitting down there as well. And you'll see that soon, because as you may know by now, this music is the portent of the end. But I just wanted to quickly mention these little memorial props that I'm putting down here. They're by Drakon125 on the workshop, if you want to find them. As you can see, these props are pretty much photorealistic, and I don't think any memorial park would be half as good without them. I hope you'll indulge me getting carried away for just a couple more minutes, but I had to get this in at the end here. It's another Chris Brammer building, and he released it hot on the heels of the Konstantinovsk City Hall building that he made for me earlier. And for him, it's Gevus Polytechnic, but for me, it's the regional office of gas auto manufacturers. And you can see me putting the signage for that on the walls there, which incidentally was also made by Drakon125. But Gaz were the automobile company behind the Volga cars and the Chaika limousines. And in this spot in Kaliningrad, there is also a car manufacturer there, although I'm not sure whether or not it's Gaz. But anyway, out front of the main offices here, I've built another fountain park. But this time I've taken a much more modernist approach to it and used these concrete roof props as a sort of sculpture going up in tiers. And I haven't got any water cascading down off these tiers. I tried it with the waterfalls and it didn't look quite right. But what I do have are these small water jets around the pool that are sort of shooting water into the fountain area. But on that note, friends, comrades, we can all finally exhale as we reach the end of this absolute marathon of a video. And joking aside, I've thoroughly enjoyed making it, and I sincerely hope you've enjoyed watching it. Well, what can I say? I suppose I should start with thank you so much to those of you who've made it to the end of this video. I really do appreciate you watching. And to those who have been commenting and watching all my previous videos, I know I have a very small audience, but it seems like an extremely kind and curious one so far, so I really appreciate that. And I want to give something back. Not much, I don't have much to give. Something small and something in Konstantinovsk. You see, I'm thinking of making a Konstantinovsk Board of Honors, the sort of thing you would see in most Soviet cities with your local heroes of labor and community organizers and people like that. The local heroes all plastered on this Board of Honors in a prominent place in the city. And if you've made it to the end of this video, then I'm pretty sure you qualify for that. So drop us a comment down below and we can sort out putting you on the Konstantinovsk Board of Honors. I'm going to set myself a more realistic target for the next episode release, so I'm going to say exactly a month from now, on the 14th of March, which also falls on a Sunday. But until then, I hope you enjoy this extra long cinematic ending. If you play the game, go and check out Chris Brammer's workshop, particularly the Konstantinovsk City Hall that he made for this episode. Take good care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.